that's the only way to essentially cast off the prison bars of self-worship, which is what's going to enslave you if you follow the wisdom of this book. Hey friends, welcome to the Alisa Childers podcast. I am excited to talk to you today about a book I recently read called Untamed by Glennon Doyle. And I'm going to give you my thoughts on that in just a moment, but I want to take a second here and tell you about today's sponsor. If you're not familiar with the ministry of Impact 360, go to impact360.org to check out all of the amazing resources and experiences that they offer to help the next generation live out their Christian faith in what's really a post-truth, a post-Christian world. And one of the experiences they offer is their Fellows Program, which is a 9-month gap year program for high school graduates to go and attend before they go off to college or into their career of choice. And actually, I just got to go visit with the fellows just before everything shut down for COVID. And it was just so sweet to get to see firsthand what this program does and how it invests in the lives of these young people. So if there's a high schooler in your life who might be interested in applying for next year, you can go to impact360.org, use my name as a promo code, that's Alisa, A-L-I-S-A, to waive your application fee. Again, that's impact360.org. So I want to tell you about this book that I just read called Untamed by Glennon Doyle. At the time I read it, it was #1 across all platforms and all genres. So it was #1 on Amazon. It was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list for many, many weeks. I'm seeing quotes and ideas from the book being shared all over social media. And typically something like this wouldn't interest me, except that I'm seeing a lot of people who identify themselves as Christian sort of buying into a lot of the ideas in the book. So I decided to go ahead and read the book, and I actually posted a review on the Gospel Coalition. It's also available on my website that just sort of talks through some of the broader points of the book. I couldn't get into too much detail with the short space that I had there. But I also want to let you know that this is the second time I've actually recorded this podcast, because I wanted to talk with my friend Ann Kennedy, who's been on my podcast before, because she's actually reviewing the same book for the Christian Research Institute. And so when her review becomes available, I'll link to that in the podcast notes. But the reason I had to redo this is because her audio quality, when I went back and listened to do some editing, her audio quality was so low that I thought it might be frustrating for people to try to listen when it's very difficult to hear and hear what she's saying clearly. But if you're not familiar with the book or with Glennon Doyle, so Glennon Doyle is previously a Christian mommy blogger. She had the very wildly popular blog space called Momastery for years. She wrote some very popular books that landed her with interviews on Oprah, being chosen as the Oprah Book Club choice, and I think that was called Love Warrior. And so her approach is that she writes memoirs. And so her first couple of books, which I have not read, so I can't comment on those, but they were written as memoirs regarding her marriage, from what I understand, and sort of navigating the difficult waters of what to do when she found out that her husband was cheating on her. So she writes about all of this in her book. And she made headlines in 2016 in a sort of broader world when she announced that she was actually going to be leaving her husband for soccer star Abby Wambach. And so the book Untamed is essentially a memoir of their love story, I guess you could say. It's her chronicling of her experience of falling in love with Abby and having to tell the kids and how everything kind of worked out. But in the process, she's really deconstructing Christianity. So if a Christian reads the book Untamed, they're going to be reading sort of a manifesto of deconstruction. But as I was talking with Anne in our original podcast that we recorded together, we both agreed that what Glennon Doyle has accomplished is, the word Anne used was masterful, and I agree. Typically, I read a lot of books by progressive Christians, and to be honest, a lot of the times it's sort of like the same kind of ideas repeated, and nothing, all of that earth-shatteringly new. But when I'm reading Glennon Doyle's book, it was very troubling because it really was a masterful deception. It was a masterfully written deception, I guess is the best way to put it, because not only does she deconstruct Christianity, but unlike a lot of other progressive books I read, she actually gives you a worldview to put in place of the faith you've essentially just walked away from. So she offers everything from the nature of what she's defining as God. She has a theory of the afterlife. She has a concept of prayer that she offers. There's moral obligations that she presents in the book. So she's not simply just trying to take away your essentially historic Christianity, but she's actually giving you an entirely different worldview to put in its place. And that's why I felt like it was so possibly dangerous and influential. And so the book opens with this story of a cheetah. And so you have to understand the cheetah story to sort of understand how to plug in the rest of her ideas. So essentially, the book begins with a trip to the family zoo. So she's there with her wife, Abby, and all their kids. And so they're watching this famous cheetah run. Like, this is the pinnacle of the zoo experience, is this cheetah run. And so essentially it's where a trained cheetah who has a friend who is a Labrador, they were raised up together with this cheetah and this Labrador, essentially for the purpose of taming the cheetah. So the cheetah wants to do everything that the Labrador does. And so they watch as this Labrador chases this stuffed pink bunny that's attached to the back of a Jeep. And so the Labrador does it, and then the cheetah does it. And so the crowd applauds, and everybody's oohing and awing as this cheetah just goes full bore after this stuffed pink bunny on the back of a Jeep. But as that's going on and all the applause, Glennon Doyle expresses that actually she felt queasy. It made her feel kind of sick because the taming of that cheetah felt so familiar to her. So at that moment, she realizes that she's lived her entire life like a caged animal. She's, settling for the store-bought steak that they give the cheetah a store-bought steak at the end as a reward. And then they put the cheetah in her enclosure when she's finished. And then this wildness comes over the cheetah, and Glennon Doyle and her family notice that she's wilder when she's in the enclosure, but she's stalking the perimeter. And so Glennon relates that with herself, like the problems that she had as a young person struggling with bulimia and then later with alcohol addiction. She wasn't crazy. She says, I was actually a cheetah. I went through this same kind of taming where I didn't know, like the cheetah doesn't know that the, savanna grasslands exist. The cheetah feels discontent, but she doesn't know why. She doesn't realize that she's supposed to be sleeping under the stars in the wild, Sahara desert, or she feels this sort of discontent, but she doesn't know why. And so the whole sort of theme of the book is built upon the taming of this cheetah, thus the title of the book, Untamed. And so before I get into some disagreements and some criticisms of the ideas in the book, I do want to say that I think this book is particularly compelling because Glennon Doyle is a phenomenal writer. She's very actually insightful. She's got some really good wisdom to ponder at times. For example, and even countercultural wisdom, which was unexpected. So she has a section talking about parenting, how at soccer practice, there was this pressure to bring 5 different kinds of cream cheese for the kids. And she's just like saying, no, we're not doing that. Like, regular cream cheese is fine. They'll live. And so there were some good, just practical moments like that. She has a section where she talks about how pornography and why pornography is bad for boys. And I found myself agreeing with her in a good bit in that section. Of course, where we would differ is she's coming from the perspective that that pornography isn't bad for everyone in every scenario, but for boys and their sexual development and things, it would be bad. So I would agree with her on that, probably disagree with her on the broader aspect of that. But she rightly identifies some common problems that women encounter. She encourages women to do the hard things. In fact, that's kind of a motto throughout the book is we can do hard things, or we do hard things. And so, but the problem is that because she rightly identifies a discontent that a lot of women feel, kind of like that cheetah, the problem though is that the solution she offers to that discontent, in my opinion, is really only going to lead women into a deeper kind of bondage, because they're going to be accepting half-truths and falsehoods about reality. So essentially, the way I see this, and this is a point I made in my book review, is that women are going to really relate with this tamed cheetah idea. Even I relate with that. But the problem is that essentially what Glennon Doyle is offering them is freedom from that cage, only just to be caged into another prison, essentially. And so just to talk about a few themes throughout the book, very much like Rachel Hollis and some of the Jen Hatmaker more recent stuff that I've been reading, there's this theme that seems to be a real unifying theme among a lot of these progressive Christian type women, blogger and author types, is that, women, you need to put yourself first. In fact, Glennon Doyle, when she's talking about making the decision to leave her husband, she quotes a Swiss psychologist, Carl Jung, and he says, "There's no greater burden on a child than the unlived life of the parent." And so this was sort of what nudged her to go ahead and leave her husband and pursue this relationship with Abby Wambach. There's a lot of use of scripture throughout the book. She actually really twists the meaning of a lot of scriptures. In fact, really turns them upside down. And one example of that is 2 or 3 times throughout the book, she mentions the Adam and Eve narrative from Genesis. And she describes being told that story as a young person. But even the way she recounts it isn't the way it actually goes in scripture. So she was given sort of a little bit of a twisted version of that to start with. But when she comes back around to that idea later, she actually uses the story of the Adam and Eve narrative to essentially blame the Bible for being part of a construct that built culture upon the control of women. So that's the kind of the first point, the first worldview point that really stands out about this book, is that Glennon Doyle sees the world definitely through a framework of the oppression of women, that women are oppressed, that our entire culture is built upon that oppression and upon that control. And then she comes back around to the Adam and Eve story, and she says this: when a woman wants more, she destroys the world. So that's how she kind of sums up the story of Adam and Eve. It wasn't that Eve chose to disobey, but rather she just wanted more. She was curious. She had ambition. And therefore, the story tells us that you shouldn't, women, you shouldn't be curious. You shouldn't be ambitious. You shouldn't be strong. Because if you act on your strength, if you act on that ambition, you're going to break the world. And so essentially she's saying that is a way to keep women under control, to keep women sort of pushed down in such a way. And so later, she actually says that we as women shouldn't think of Eve's appetite as wrong. And then she says, this is a quote, she says, "Maybe Eve was never meant to be our warning. Maybe she was meant to be our model." And then she just boldly states, "Own your wanting, eat the apple." And so she's flipping the Christian worldview on its head, where essentially, historically, the Christian worldview would say that Adam and Eve's rebellion against God in the Garden of Eden ushered in sin and a curse, and this sin nature gets passed down to all of us. But Glennon Doyle is saying, no, it was right that she ate the apple, and we should all do the same. And so in that worldview, sin is no longer what's wrong with the world, but maybe unrealized ambitions, maybe unexplored curiosity. So it's like, in my view, and I wrote this again in my review, is it's like placing a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. If the problem with humanity, and just, I mean, a quick study of human history will tell you that something is wrong with humans. But if that is the deepest problem with humanity, is sin, if we say, well, no, it's not sin, it's just that we haven't realized our potential, or we haven't put ourselves first enough, or we haven't owned our desires and our wanting and our curiosities, well, that's not going to fix what the real problem is. In fact, it will only make it worse. And so my concern is that if women buy into this idea, they're going to just end up on a lifelong journey to find happiness in Band-Aids on a gunshot wound. So just temporary fixes, things that might make them happy for a minute, but the minute those things stop working out, they're going to be on to the next thing. This is where the beauty of the Christian worldview just shines so beautifully. One of, I think, the great lies that's been told to Christians is this prosperity gospel idea that when you become a Christian, it's going to solve all your problems. All of a sudden, you're going to just be super happy all the time. You are going to have riches. You'll never be sick. You're never going to have to go through difficult things. And that's sort of a sum up of the prosperity gospel. But rightly, in the last couple of decades, more people have come out to condemn that as a heresy, because it is a heresy. That's not what Jesus promised. Jesus promised that if you follow him, you will actually definitely have trials because you follow him. He promised suffering. He promised that, he said, the world will hate you just like it hated me. He promised persecution. He said, my kingdom is not of this world. And so the Christian, when we accept the truth of that bad news, that the problem with humanity is sin, the beauty of that is that we can then put our hope in the finished work of Jesus on the cross, knowing that we can have a deep, real, true peace and settled mind amidst the longing and the discontent we might feel, like we might relate with that cheetah, because we're not putting our hope in things of the world. In fact, according to Romans 18, Paul says that he considers that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed in us. So for the Christian, our eyes are on this bigger kingdom of God. In fact, if you haven't seen the latest Pilgrim's Progress cartoon on Revelation Media, watch that with your kids, because that book and that story does such a great job of teaching us as Christians, really, that our eyes are for that kingdom. We are not citizens of this world. Now, that doesn't mean that becoming a Christian is just like buying an insurance card and, we're just going to let the world burn because we're going to go to heaven one day. It's about a much greater kingdom and our citizenship being in that kingdom. And that's a beautiful story, because no matter what does happen here, our hope and our eyes are on our King and what he have finished and accomplished on the cross when he said, it is finished. And that's the hope and the stability as Christian women that we can have no matter what happens in our lives. If we encounter some kind of horrible sickness or relationship trouble or problems with our kids or whatever it may be, we're not searching for the next hit of happiness. We're resting in the truth of who God is and what he's accomplished in the world. And so that's one concern I have with her worldview, that essentially I said she's deconstructing your Christian worldview, and this is what she's giving you in its place. It's not that sin is the problem and that Eve was sinful for eating the apple. It's the opposite. You should eat the apple, And you should always be sort of following your heart and your deepest instincts. And we're going to get into following your heart in just a minute, because this is a big theme in the book as well. So again, more scripture. Again, my interest in this book is how it will interact with Christianity. If this was just purely a secular book, I wouldn't probably be reviewing it. But because I'm seeing it influence Christians, that's why I want to help as best I can, maybe help untie some of those knots. And so Doyle quotes Psalm 46, which is the famous psalm that says, "Be still and know that I am God." But she just quotes the first part, "Be still and know." I think she said she had it in a card and somebody had written it, so she thought, well, okay, I'm going to take that advice. And so that inspired her to spend 10 minutes a day meditating. And so she describes these, she doesn't use the word meditate, but she describes it as just sitting in complete silence. And so at first it's difficult. She's got 100 things running through her mind, but every day that she's consistent to spend this 10 minutes in her closet in utter silence, she learns to what she calls drop lower. So in each session, she drops lower, and eventually she finds this new level inside of herself that she identifies as a knowing. Now, the knowing is spelled with a capital K. And actually I have to, make fun of myself because I actually mentioned this point in a previous podcast and said it was spelled with a capital N. Yes, I can spell, but I just misspoke. But yeah, she identifies this knowing with a capital K. So the knowing has almost a godlike quality. When Abby said something like, how do you know when you're in your closet, you're not just talking to yourself? And Glennon Doyle says this. She says, if what I've found in the deep is just myself, if what I've learned is not how to commune with God, but how to commune with myself, if who I have learned to trust is not God, but myself, and if for the rest of my life, no matter how lost I get, I know exactly where and how to find myself again, well then, that is certainly enough of a miracle for me. And so then she goes on to say that she only takes orders from her knowing. And this is where we're going to get into a little bit of her view of morality in just a moment, but just to kind of reiterate those worldview points. So her approach to what's wrong with the world is not sin. It's really a culture that's built upon the oppression of women. Her view of prayer is this type of meditative state of sinking lower and lower and finding this knowing, which is really her view of the nature of God. Regularly throughout the book, at least 3 times, she conflates the self with God, and she'll actually use those terms interchangeably. Even, the climax of the book at the very end, she alludes to Exodus 3, where Moses is having that burning bush conversation with God and references the fact that God told Moses, "I am." And so then the book ends with her turning that question on herself and saying, what are you, Glennon? And so after a series of further questions, she finally answers, "I am, I am, I am." And that's a fairly bold conflation of the self with God. So again, the worldview points being her view of sin, her view of the nature of God, her view of prayer. And then there's also this view of the afterlife that she has, that she never uses words like pantheism or panentheism, but it definitely stems from a pantheistic type view of the world. She describes having a conversation with her daughter when her daughter was kind of feeling out of sorts, and she explained to her daughter that all human beings are connected. We are essentially the same stuff. And so she uses a metaphor of a bucket and an ocean, and she tells her daughter, look, right now you're kind of feeling this angst and this out of sortsness because you are really not supposed to be separated from other people. And so you're not a bucket filled with ocean water. You are actually the ocean that's just gathered up in a bucket right now, referencing, being contained within a body. And then she describes that after we die, that bucket will be poured back into the ocean. And then at that point, there'll be no separation between us and other people. And this is just a heavily New Age idea of us being all one, all made of the same substance, very pantheistic, all is God, essentially. And so, just kind of make the point that as she's deconstructing the Christian worldview, she's giving you some really strong worldview points to put in its place. Now, I want to talk about her view of morality, of right and wrong. She basically contends in the book that words like right and wrong, good and bad, using words like should and shouldn't, these are not real concepts, right? These are just, again, culturally constructed cages. So again, remember the metaphor of the cheetah. So every time you use words like right and wrong, good, bad, should, shouldn't, ought not to, you're kind of like that cheetah that's in that cage that you don't need to be in. And this is where I think it's just kind of dangerous too, is she actually encourages women to ignore our minds. She says our minds are clouded by indoctrination. They're trained. So whenever you try to think logically about something, whenever you try to think critically about something with your intellectual mind, all you're going to end up doing is just resorting to however you've been indoctrinated and trained to think. And so this brings us back to the knowing. So she says everything that she decides to do or not to do, all the decisions that she makes are based upon this knowing. And so she describes this conversation she has with her knowing where she's asking what she should do. And she's learned to sink until she feels what she calls liquid gold. And when she feels the liquid gold, then she knows what to do. So if a decision feels warm, then it's the right thing to do. If it feels cold, then it's the wrong thing to do. She actually goes on to say that this is how decisions are made within her team and in her brand, is that if they're having a business meeting and somebody's in charge of making a decision, they have to consider the question, does this feel warm or does this feel cold? Now, obviously, just stepping out of the Christian worldview for a moment, just this is such an assault on the intellectual mind that it's so scary, because it's just basically, I mean, I don't mean to say this lightly. I really actually mean this quite seriously. It's essentially Elsa from Frozen singing, let it go, no right, no wrong, no rules for me, I'm free. I mean, this is Frozen for adults, right? This is follow your heart, follow your feelings. Your feelings won't lie to you. You've got to listen to those things and don't think with your intellectual mind. But again, for a Christian, as tempting as it might be to want to obey our desires, to be like Eve and want, own the wanting of that apple, we know, if we're biblically informed Christians, that the heart is deceitful and desperately sick. It tells us that in Jeremiah and in Hebrews. Proverbs 3:4 tells us not to lean on our own understanding. Jesus himself taught that out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, and slander. And so the Christian approach to morality is that we understand that following Jesus means denying ourselves, not discovering the God inside of ourselves. It doesn't mean untaming our sinful nature, but actually being conformed to the image of Christ as in a process of sanctification as the Holy Spirit works that out in our life. We know that obedience to Jesus is far better than any kind of temporary high of, getting that better job or finally getting that romance you've been waiting for, or, whatever it may be, however that might present itself, because we rest in the fact of knowing that in the presence of the one true holy God, there is fullness of joy, as it says in Psalms 16. And so it's a scary thing, I think, to tell people to follow their hearts. But here's a quote from the book. She said, I looked at all of those contradictory opinions and thought, if there is, in fact, an objective right or wrong way to handle this, why do all these people have such different ideas about what a person should do? Well, we can answer that from the Christian worldview by saying it's because our hearts are desperately sick and people are going to disagree over what is right and wrong. And then she goes on, I had an epiphany. It must be that should and shouldn't, right and wrong, good and bad, they're not wild, they're not real. They're just culturally constructed, artificial, ever-changing cages created to maintain institutions. Again, there's that idea of that worldview point of viewing what's wrong with the world being this sort of system of oppression, this institution that's set up a certain way. And she said, it struck me that in every family, culture, or religion, ideas of right and wrong are like hot cattle prods, the barking sheepdogs that keep the masses in the herd. They are the bars that keep us caged. Now, I do have to make an observation here. She is saying that none of this stuff exists, that right and wrong don't exist. These are just culturally constructed cages. But her entire book is a list of do's and don'ts, from everything from how to think about racism, to abortion, to sexuality, to activism. It's not, it's not even like a soft suggestion of what she thinks is right and wrong. It's a manifesto of right and wrong. The entire book is. And so that just goes to show why when people try to embrace some kind of moral relativism, it will always fail because nobody actually lives that out consistently in the world. If I go up and steal someone's money, I don't care how deeply their moral relativity is ingrained in their life, they're going to say, you can't do that. That's wrong or that's unfair. And so I think it's much better to just agree that morality is objective, and we can be wrong about what that is. Like I, in my darkened heart, might believe something incorrect about what's right and wrong, but morality is objective. And so there's a quote from her book that's been making the rounds on social media. A lot of Christians have been commenting on it. And here's the quote. It says, "We do not need more selfless women. What we need right now is more women who have detoxed themselves so completely from the world's expectations that they are full of nothing but themselves. What we need are women who are full of themselves. A woman who is full of herself knows and trusts herself enough to say and do what must be done. She lets the rest burn." Now, you can understand now that you have a bit of a framework into her worldview, how she sees the world. If you believe that your deepest self really essentially is God, or you can use those terms interchangeably, well, you would want to be full of that, right? But this is why when we build our worldview, when we think critically and we think wisely about how we see the world, it's very important that we get the foundational building blocks correct, right? Our view of who God is, his nature, how he reveals himself in the world, his role as creator, as redeemer, all of those things are going to be a foundational building block, because if we get that wrong, then it's going to have a trickle-down effect of all of our other beliefs. And so essentially she's saying, like, we want to be full of the God that's inside us. We want to so own our desires and our wantings and our curiosities and our ambitions. We don't want to be apologizing for anything. We want to completely own those things and be full of ourselves. And so she redefines a lot of words as she goes through her journey in this book. And so as she lays the framework for this new worldview that she's giving us to plug into the one she's essentially deconstructing, she redefines words like faith and like love. We'll talk about both of those. But to give a little foundation for that, toward the end of the book, she says that she sort of struggles with whether or not to still identify herself as a Christian. And essentially she says, I'm not going to let that word go because it's been hijacked. She believes that the Christian faith has been hijacked, and so she wants to reclaim the true definition. And so a lot of this has to do with how she defines the word faith. And so she says this. She says, "I wrote myself a new memo about what it means to have a strong faith. To me, faith is not a public allegiance to a set of outer beliefs, but a private surrender to the inner knowing." And so essentially she's saying, if you view faith as believing certain doctrines outside of yourself, That's not how I see faith. She sees faith as basically following her feelings. And so she said, I stopped believing in middlemen or hierarchy between me and God. Now, this is extremely important because the Christian worldview tells us that Jesus is actually the bridge between us and God. Of course, going back to the Garden of Eden, our sin being the thing that separates us from God. Well, Jesus comes to be that priest that stands, that intercedes for us, that makes that bridge across to reconcile us to God. And so she's saying, I stopped believing in middlemen or hierarchy between me and God. I went from certain and defensive to curious, wide-eyed, and awed, from closed fists to open arms, from the shallow to the deep end. Now, let's note that she's already said that there's no such thing as right or wrong. But obviously, she thinks it's right to be wide-eyed and awed and not good to be certain and defensive. She obviously thinks closed fists is wrong, whereas open arms is right. She obviously thinks the shallow end is not as good as the deep end. And so she says, for me, living in faith means allowing to burn all that separates me from my knowing so that one day I can say I and the mother are one. Now, this is a reference to her view of God, where in the times in the book when she's not conflating self with God, she describes God as a she. She says, if I'm going to refer to God, I'm going to call her a she. And so she describes this divine mother, but again, conflates that with what's already inside of herself. And so she's essentially redefining the word faith. And so in that, she talks about being brave, what it means to be brave as a woman living in the world. And so she says this, brave means living from the inside out. Brave means in every uncertain moment, turning inward, feeling for the knowing and speaking it out loud. Since the knowing is specific, personal, and ever-changing, so is brave. Whether you are brave or not cannot be judged by people on the outside. Sometimes being brave requires letting the crowd think you're a coward. Sometimes being brave means letting everyone down but yourself. Now you can see that there's problems in here, because if the knowing, which she's conflating with God, is ever-changing, well, that essentially gives us an excuse to just do whatever feels right in the moment. What was right yesterday might not be right today. And so this is just an excuse to follow our feelings and do whatever makes us happy. I want to move on to how she redefines the word love. I want to start by reading the biblical definition of love from 1 Corinthians 13. So it says this, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And so notice here that biblical love has attitudes and actions attached to it, particularly where it says it does not rejoice at wrongdoing. Love cannot rejoice at sin. It cannot rejoice at injustice. It cannot rejoice in wrongful actions, but it rejoices with the truth. This is a very important part of the biblical definition of love. We can't rejoice in something that is not the truth. Now, I want to compare that with how Glennon Doyle has redefined the word love. So the context for this is that she received an email from a lady or an old acquaintance from the church that she had left. And I'm assuming that this was probably more of a conservative church that would not be gay affirming or something along those lines. And so the email said basically like, Abby, can I ask you something? Glennon, can I ask you something? I know that you and Abby love each other so much. It's really something. But at the same time, I still believe that gayness is wrong. I want to be able to love you unconditionally, but I'd have to abandon my beliefs. What am I supposed to do with this? And then she describes it as a God conflict. And so Glennon says that she felt for her. You know, she was basically saying, I want to be free to love you, but I'm caged by my beliefs. And so this is the response that Glennon sent to her. And this is where her redefinition of love comes in. She says, first of all, thank you for knowing you have a choice to make. Thank you for not landing on, I love you, but we know that love has no buts. If you want to change me, you do not love me. If you feel warm toward me, but also believe I'm going to burn in hell, you do not love me. If you wish me well, but vote against my family being protected by the law, you do not love me. Thank you for understanding that to love me as yourself means to want for me and my family every good thing you want for yourself and your family. Anything less than this is not love. So yes, I agree that you have a choice to make. You have to choose between loving me and keeping your beliefs. Now, this is in direct opposition to the biblical definition of love, because if this is true, if love has no buts, if you want to change me, you don't love me, then that means Jesus doesn't love us, because Jesus came to save us from our sin. The Holy Spirit is given to us to help in that process of sanctification where we become more and more conformed to the image of Christ every day, which means a constant changing. So according to Glennon Doyle's definition of love, Jesus doesn't love us. She said, if you feel warm toward me, but also believe I'm going to burn in hell, you do not love me. Again, let's look at Jesus. Jesus told a lot of people they were going to hell when he was here on earth. And interestingly, it even says when he was talking to the rich young ruler that he loved him. But ultimately, the rich young ruler went away sad because he didn't end up following Jesus. But Jesus loved him. And Jesus talks about hell more than anyone. And so according to Glennon Doyle's definition, Jesus doesn't love us. And then she brings in the political element. If you wish me well, but vote against my family being protected by the law, you do not love me. And so just note again, this is somebody who says there's no such thing as right or wrong, good or bad, should or shouldn't. So let's kind of swing back around to the cheetah analogy. I think that she gets this right. I think that many women live in metaphorical cages because they don't understand who and what they really are. Just like that cheetah that was stalking the perimeter of her enclosure, cheetah thinks that running after a plushie toy is what life is all about, because she's never tasted the freedom of her natural habitat. She's discontent because she knows deep down she was made for more. She just doesn't know what that is because she's never been in the wild. And so the problem, though, with what Doyle is arguing is that, first of all, women are not cheetahs, right? If we view ourselves as untamed animals, then we'll just end up on our own kind of cheetah run, chasing that plush pink bunny, because we'll be chasing an ideal that will never bring true satisfaction. And so of this kind of longing she describes, we do feel it, right? I feel that. I feel that sort of longing. But I look at it this way. I think C.S. Lewis wrote something very, very apt for this. And this is famous. He's known for this. He says, if I find in myself a desire for which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. And so in this, I think Lewis is getting at a much better solution to that feeling of discontent that all of us feel. We all feel that because we weren't really made for this world, right? If we really discover what we are, the reason we were created, then living for that is what's going to bring the true contentment, not chasing ideals and following our feelings and doing all of this. And so instead of comparing ourselves to these wild animals in captivity, the answer to the deep, unrealized yearnings that we all feel is to recognize that we were made in the image of a holy God, and we have a purpose. We were actually made with a purpose, and that purpose is to glorify God, not just to chase superficial happiness. So our natural habitat, if we compare ourselves with a cheetah, our natural habitat is a kingdom that is described as here, but not yet, right? So we're living in the tension of one day all things will be made new, every tear will be wiped away, but it's not yet. So we are living in that tension. So obeying our desires might temporarily distract us, but they're not going to give the true freedom that God offers for all of those feelings of longing that we're all feeling. And so essentially, I think what this book does is offer a counterfeit type of freedom. And what it does is it frees you from categories of right and wrong. It frees you from categories like objective truth. It frees you from having to obey the Bible or following the tenets of Christianity or obeying the teachings of Jesus. But in freeing you from those things, it's just going to enslave you to another master. And that master is sin, which is what got us in this mess in the first place. By misdiagnosing what's wrong with humanity, she's basically building this worldview that's just going to enslave you back to sin, which is what's wrong with the world anyway. So for the Christian, true freedom isn't going to be found by relying on our inner voice, which can misguide us or change on a dime. My heart, can I tell you how many times my heart has lied to me? How many times I have felt something so strongly only to discover that it wasn't true or it was something false? I can't tell you how many times through my life my heart and my emotions have gotten me into big trouble. But that freedom, that true freedom, is not found by looking deep inside ourselves, but it's found by maybe looking deep inside ourselves, but dying to the sinner that we meet there. See, when we look truly deep inside ourselves, we're not going to find this liquid gold knowing. We're actually going to find a sinner who's in desperate need of salvation. And so turning to Christ is that freedom that is really going to let us out of that enclosure into what we were actually made to be and how we were made to live. And so freedom means trusting in the saving work of Jesus on the cross. It doesn't justify sin, but it liberates us from its power. That's what Jesus accomplished on the cross. He took our sins upon himself and essentially defeated the power of death and sin. And so as a Christian, we realize that to be freed from the slavery to sin is actually to be a slave to God. And so I listened once to a soteriology class from Dallas Theological Seminary, and there was such a great point that the professor made, because he said, we always talk about freedom as Christians, the freedom in Christ and all this kind of freedom. He says, I'm not sure we truly understand what freedom means, or especially meant in that first century Roman Empire context. Some scholars say that up to 80%, anywhere from 60 to 80 to 90% of people in the first century Roman Empire were in some form of slavery. They were oppressed, right? And so nobody was free. But this concept of freedom that the Bible talks about is not just setting you free from your former master just to do whatever you want, but it's actually purchasing you. Jesus paid the price. We've been bought with a price. So essentially we become a slave to God, but we have the choice. We can be a slave to our sin, which is, I think, what Glennon Doyle would offer you is just slavery to sin, or we can be a slave to God. It's like Bob Dylan said, you're going to have to serve somebody. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you're not just free from any master. And so the choice we have is, which master are we going to serve? Because one leads to death and the other leads to eternal life. And so just as a wrap up on this book, despite her allusions to faith and Jesus and the Bible, her central message just cannot be reconciled with Christianity. It's actually the opposite of Christianity at every turn, from the nature of God to what's wrong with the world, to what prayer is, to what the afterlife is, to how things are made better, to morality, to faith. It's the exact opposite of Christianity. And so You know, it might feel good to read the book. It might give you this sort of like plasticky, saccharine promise of, you know, living your best life now, but it's really nothing more than New Age dogma that's mixed with some self-help. And it's just basically another type of prosperity gospel that isn't going to give you true contentment. For a woman to find true contentment, you know, we have to resist the cultural trends for living for the here and now. And that's hard to do in this culture. But real bravery means trading that cage for the cross. And that's the only way to essentially cast off the prison bars of self-worship, which is what's going to enslave you if you follow the wisdom of this book. It's going to enslave you to self-worship, but you will be worshiping yourself, who is horribly sinful. And that's just going to send you in circles looking for happiness that you're never going to, or you may find for a little while. I mean, who knows? You might feel happy for a while, but it's not going to truly set you free. So I think the goal is not to become untamed, but to realize who we are, who we were created to be, putting the pieces of our worldview together in a way that reflects reality, so that when we choose to serve Jesus, when we serve to give our lives to Christ, we are essentially becoming slaves to God in a way that will manifest itself with true joy and true peace and true contentment, peace, like real peace. So I think as persuasive as her writing is, as even insightful at times, as compelling and seductive these ideas are, I would just encourage Christian women to resist. We know the nature of reality because we have God's word, and there's just nothing that's going to bring real freedom like obeying Jesus and picking up our cross and following him, which we know will include suffering. It will include hardship, but there's a peace deep down that I wouldn't trade for anything. So thanks so much for watching today. Please subscribe on YouTube if you want to see more videos like this. Click the bell icon because that'll let you know when new videos are posted. If you're listening on iTunes, thank you for listening. Please subscribe there. Leave us a 5-star review. We'd love that. And also, if you want to go deeper with the ministry, if you want to have access to bonus content, to early access to posts and things like that, we have a Patreon-only Facebook group where we're building a great community. If you want to know more about that, go to patreon.com/Alisa Childers. Thanks so much. Have a great day.